Namaste. Amen. Blessed be. All this month at Tapestry, we're talking about beloved community. It's sort of a theological and political idea that Dr. King spoke about very poetically, but he never really defined it. So I'm spending these 3 Sundays breaking it down into what I think are 3 key pieces. Last week I talked about how our liberation and our salvation is all tied up together, the powerful and the oppressed from every corner of the globe. Today I want to talk more about nonviolent resistance as a fierce kind of love. Next Sunday I'll talk about beloved community as a dream that continues to grow as we meet new and different neighbors and welcome them into relationship. Now, nonviolent resistance has played a central role in shaping United States history and preserving our democracy. Still, it's often misunderstood. Sometimes it's seen as a sort of passive, indirect way of avoiding conflict, and some misunderstand it as a political strategy to overcome a truly hated enemy. Effective nonviolence, though, walks a very thin line between those 2 realities. It's neither passive nor violent. It confronts injustice and hypocrisy through radical and fearless demonstrations of love. Today, I can't help draw a parallel between nonviolent resistance and the fierce love we can see in motherhood. I want to begin by describing the fierceness of that love. Nonviolence unflinchingly resists some of the greatest powers in the world. Remember, this was the strategy that stood against American militarism, American racial oppression, and British colonial rule. These are literally some of the most powerful forces of human history. It confronts adversaries, big and small, with laser-like focus on the issues of accountability and integrity. Now, this is one of the many links that I found this week in parenting. As far as I can tell, parenting is a multi-headed hydra. It's a little dramatic, but I think you get the point. The challenges are many, and they regenerate. In the midst of parenting challenges, it seems to me that cultivating a sense of integrity in children is really the fundamental goal, and one that can't be achieved without some sense of firmness. It's up to parents to show that lying is not acceptable, and following through with your commitments is absolutely golden. In the children's story that Caitlin told us last week, we heard from Arun Gandhi. He's the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. I've actually heard him tell this story in person a few times. He tells the story of how, as a small child, walking home from school, he had about a half a pencil, and he really wanted a new pencil, so he discarded this pencil into the grass as he walked by. Later that night, as he sat down to do his homework with his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi asked, "Well, where's your pencil? You had a perfectly good one earlier today." And Arun explained, "Oh, it was no longer useful." So Mahatma Gandhi sent his grandson out in the night with a flashlight to find his half pencil in the dark in the grass. And as he explains the story, Arun says that his grandfather told him that a vow wasn't just a promise to other people, it's a promise to yourself. One of the greatest tasks of parenting is to instill a sense of integrity in children. And I think the confrontational piece of nonviolent resistance, similarly, is about holding up a mirror to powers that be to point out where hypocrisy might lie. By bringing into focus the oppression at hand, nonviolent resistors are able to demonstrate where the values of society aren't actually how folks are behaving or being treated. Maybe a law is unconstitutional. Maybe rules violate our basic shared values of fairness and liberty. Maybe a leader's actions are different from what he has publicly said. However the hypocrisy is manifest, nonviolent resistance seeks to shine a light on that gap. The goal isn't to destroy an adversary or to humiliate people. The goal is to invite leaders and a whole community to live up to what they say, to be their best selves, to grow into integrity. It's not all that different from parenting. Integrity is a linchpin of nonviolent resistance, not just as it points out the hypocrisy of an adversary. It's also about being true to your word as a practitioner. The goal isn't to surprise someone with your secret strategy. The goal is to surprise your adversary by having the guts to do what you say you're going to do. It's saying, I will sit at this lunch table, and sitting there regardless of the consequences. I will sit on this bus. I will march with my community. I will chain myself to this tree. I will not pay this war tax because these laws are unjust. I will break them, regardless of the consequence. I will do these things in love, without seeking retaliation, because I am putting my faith into action, and that kind of faith can move mountains. There's a tremendous power in that kind of brave integrity. Every Mother's Day, I'm reminded of a song by Holly Near that also talks about that kind of integrity. It's called 1,000 Grandmothers. Holly Near describes the powerful impact that might be had by channeling the intense, loving power of 1,000 grandmothers. She sings about these grandmothers ending war and confronting criminals and making them weep in the presence of strong and unflinching love. She sings passionately about the powerful change that these loving elders could offer. And just when the song seems a little bit naive and Pollyanna, she offers these lyrics. If you think these women are too soft to face the world at hand, then you've never known the power of love, and you fail to understand. An old woman holds a powerful force when she no longer needs to please. She can cut your shallow life to bits and bring you to your knees. We best get down on our knees and pray for 1,000 grandmothers. Will you please come volunteer? No longer tucked deep out of sight, will you bring your power here? Will you bring your power here? Nonviolent resistance is a fierce love. It confronts the strongest powers in the world, mostly by following through on commitments and facing the consequences willingly. It's a confident way of loving and offering oneself for a greater good. It seems in so many ways motherhood is an exercise in sacrifice. That burden is getting more and more shared these days. But mothers spend an unbelievable amount of time caring for children. As a non-parent myself, I literally do not understand how you find enough hours to live your life and to provide complete care for another human being. It's an inspiring sacrifice. Beyond the time, there's the physical sacrifice. In addition to the childbirth, there is lifting and feeding and picking up and wiping and strolling and bouncing and bathing and a long list of other very active verbs. Sometimes I'm told those are joyful. A lot of it, though, is exhausting. Out of the sacrifices of motherhood, beautiful things emerge. New life emerges and hope. Nonviolent resistance also leverages suffering to transform the world. The formal theological language for this is voluntary redemptive suffering. Voluntary redemptive suffering is sacrifice or suffering that one takes on willingly to serve the cause of a greater truth. The key, though, is choice. It's voluntary. There's nothing redemptive about suffering itself. But when a person or a whole community steps forward to choose when and how they will suffer, they take charge of the situation. When children in Birmingham, Alabama, marched against segregation, the nation saw on the evening news that they were beaten by police, knocked down by fire hoses, and attacked by snarling dogs. Now, for decades before that, they had suffered segregation involuntarily, and few seemed to notice or care. But when those children took their stand, when they volunteered to suffer publicly for the cause, the president, the Congress, and the courts finally took notice. That model of public display of voluntary suffering was a strategy that came to us from India. Before Dr. King, Mahatma Gandhi showed the world the power of voluntary redemptive suffering. Instead of paying a few pennies for a salt tax, he walked 240 miles to the sea to make salt. He was arrested, never made it there, but thousands marched in his place. These followers of Gandhi lined up, thousands of brave souls lined up to be beaten with clubs by the police, without fighting back or even raising a hand to defend themselves. And witnesses around the world began to demand a better way. The key to voluntary redemptive suffering, as Gandhi used it, was to make the choice clear and to avoid anything that remotely resembled retaliation. Voluntary redemptive suffering means accepting the consequences for breaking the law without fighting back. And the power in that is a moral one, not a physical one. Here in the United States, the history of voluntary redemptive suffering is deeply connected to a Christian understanding of Jesus. For many Christians, the suffering of Jesus on the cross was the central moment of redemption for humanity. It was suffering that could have been avoided, but God, through Jesus, took on that suffering willingly. It's not only about Jesus, though. For most people involved in the movement, and for Unitarian Universalists, voluntary redemptive suffering also calls on the basic moral goodness of the people who witness suffering. We believe in the basic integrity of our neighbors, the ability of people to find a moral truth. We believe that when people are awakened through our demonstration, they'll find a better way. And once our neighbors are awakened to injustice, their conscience will force them to end it. I've talked a lot about integrity, and I've talked about voluntary redemptive suffering. Those are both huge, scary challenges. There's one more challenge, though, that may be even greater, but is part of our everyday lives. Nonviolence requires a commitment to truth, not just your own perception of how the world appears. It's just like the parable of the blind man and the elephant. Our perception of reality is never perfect. And knowing our knowledge has its limits, in a nonviolent framework, we always engage others with the possibility that they may have a window into the truth that we do not have. Even our adversary may understand something about the situation that we do not. I know it sounds strange, but hear me out. This is actually a posture of tremendous confidence. As religious skeptics, we understand that the position of greatest faith is the position that invites deeper questions. The truly faithful person doesn't reject the discoveries of science or the growing knowledge of history. The truly faithful person welcomes all sources of knowledge as tools to more fully understand the universe and God. In nonviolence, we're invited to have the same kind of faith in truth. Rather than clinging rigidly to our ideological stance, a true commitment to truth requires us to be open to considering possibilities that our position may not be perfect. That kind of confidence and openness is disarming to this world. Admitting that we might be wrong brings a whole different type of relationship opportunity. Every once in a while, I see this type of trusting moment between parents and their children, when parents rethink what they knew. And I'm not talking about kids knowing pop culture references. I'm talking about kids being sometimes more attuned to what is fair, or remembering exactly what their parents said last week. Nonviolence is really a position of seeking, not of certainty. It's seeking a deeper truth while also seeking more justice. Seeking to build a community that lives up to its ideals while seeking to remove the hatred and greed from our own hearts. I want to close today by explaining again that building beloved community is not just a political agenda. It's also about how we live together here at Tapestry and how we live together at home in our families. Our calling isn't to rigidly cling to our convictions. Our calling is to help one another grow toward integrity and to seek truth in love. Imagine that. I truly believe that we cannot change the world out there without growing in love in this community and in our own hearts. Amen.